So how do you create plot that is so strong and structure that is so compelling readers don't go to bed and keep reading till 2, 3 a.m.? Nerd Nation. Today we're going to talk about one of the next most important things to do if you're writing a novel. This is episode 2, plot and structure, how to build a compelling story from beginning to end. All right, so who am I? I've been writing since 2009, or my first book was published in 2009, and I've written all these books. All right, plot is the engine. Without it, you're going nowhere, right? You could have great characters, but if you don't have a plot, you don't have a somewhere where you are going, or the character's going, or a destination, right? It's going to be a pretty slow story. So we're going to talk about 3 acts: the setup, confrontation, and resolution. These are the components that make a really good plot or structure. We're going to talk about story beats, right? The 5 checkpoints every story needs. And we're going to talk about plotters versus pantsers. I actually prefer the name organic versus structured, but that's kind of the name that people use. Okay, structure is not a cage, it's a map, right? Readers feel missing structure even if they can't name it. So a lot of times when a reader just is confused about where a story is going, right, it's comes down to the plot of what's been going on. It's just confusing. It's all over the place. It seems like the reader had a different ambition at different points when they were writing the book. Great characters need somewhere to go. We just talked about great characters. Structure gives you confidence to write the middle. Okay, so the middle is, in a lot of ways, it is the easiest part, right? You're just throwing information out there. But the beginning and end can be very difficult to tie together if you don't have structure, right? Because you have the starting point, you have the end point, but the middle, you can just pretty much go all these different places. But if you don't have structure, it will be difficult to land the story where you want it. The 3-act structure, the setup, take about 25%. This is very broad in general, right? This is just more of a guideline. There are moments where you're going to do a quicker setup. There's going to be moments where you do a longer middle confrontation. There's going to be parts where you do longer or shorter resolution. Depends really a lot on the genre of the book, right? But this is just a general idea. The setup, 25% of the book. Introduce protagonist, world, central conflict. Ends with the inciting incident. So basically, this is the world I have. It's really awesome. Come hang out with me. But then something changes in the story where now there is a confrontation of some sort. Confrontation, this is about 50% of the book. And this is Act 2, escalating obstacles, subplots, and internal flaws. Ends with Dark Night of the Soul, right? Dark Night of the Soul is basically where that hero is getting crushed. And the whole world, as Anne of Green Gables says, the depths of despair, right? Where the whole world is turned against them, that they've lost everything, but they have this determination inside of them where they are going to push on. And then you got the resolution, the climax, resolution, and transformation. You have the exciting, the tip of the story arc, what is so exciting, you have a resolution, and then if it is a good story, you're going to have some sort of transformation. The situation has changed, the person has changed. This is how it's better, or even sometimes worse. Ends with the world and characters are changed. Act 1, the setup. Your job in Act 1, introduce the protagonist, world, and central conflict, establish the normal world before change, end on the inciting incident. Real example, The Hunger Games, Katniss volunteers for her sister, right? Harry Potter, The Letter from Hogwarts. Now, this is really important for new writers to remember versus seasoned writers. And I think I might even put a bullet point. No, I didn't. There is a lot more patience for a seasoned writer than there is for a new writer. For a new writer, this is going to be much shorter in your book setup because readers don't have necessarily the patience or understand if there's going to be a major payoff. Now, if you read a book, let's say by Brandon Sanderson, readers already know there is going to be a major payoff. They've read several books from Brandon Sanderson, so they can get away with a much slower setup in the beginning. They can pull more into the world or pour more people into the world without necessarily losing their readership. As a new author, individuals just won't give you that much grace, right? You are going to need to establish the setup quicker, and you need to use concise language, and you need to establish that hook early, right? Oh, actually, I did add a bullet point there. You can't spend as much time in Act 1 as an established author. That's very important to remember. Act 2, 50% of your novel, the longest, hardest, most important section. Now, for me, it's not necessarily the hardest. It's hardest in the sense that you have a lot of plot points going on, and you need to keep track of it, make sure you're giving an equal share to those elements, and that threads aren't dying. But this is kind of the fun part for me. I'm just writing. I'm having a good time. I'm putting stories together, and then the last part, I've got to tie it all up. That can be a little bit hectic and stressful, especially if you're a pantser, and we'll talk about that in a second. In this, you're going to protagonist pursues a goal against escalating obstacles, subplots, relationship, and internal flaws surface. Protagonist shifts from reactive to active at the midpoint, right? So the inciting event a lot of times has nothing to do with what the main protagonist actually did. It's not their fault, right? Sometimes it is. Most of the time it isn't, right? But at some point in the story, they become, instead of reacting to the situation, they start becoming proactive, right? And this is kind of where you feel that training montage. You feel power. You feel like this person is rising up to the challenge. Ends at the dark night of the soul. All seems lost, and we were talking a little bit about that. The depths of despair, where the whole world is collapsing in on you, the world, the situation. Everything seems lost. In Acadia, this is this is Jessica. About 3/4 of the way through, she has a moment where pretty much everything gets lost. If Act 2 feels like a swamp, you haven't given your protagonist a clear goal with real stakes, right? Act 3, the resolution, 25% of your novel. Earn your ending. Protagonist digs deep and applies what they've learned. Final confrontation, the climax. Conflict resolves, not always happily, but it closes. There is a loop to end that confrontation. And the world has changed. The character has changed. Things might not be the best, but things are definitely different. A good ending feels both surprising and inevitable. If that doesn't make sense, well, it doesn't much make sense until you watch or you read a good book where it is surprising, but at the same time it all made sense, where all the plot points were leaning that way, and it's something that you could have seen, right? So a lot of writers try to put a twist in that's so dramatic and so surprising that it also doesn't feel inevitable. If I may critique one of Brandon Sanderson's books, one of his books early on, in Mistborn, I believe it was the first book. It very much feels the ending surprising, but it also didn't feel inevitable. It didn't feel like any of that ending was being set up, and it was surprising. But you want little touchstones along the way where readers are saying, "Oh, that's why that was," or "That's why that happened." Okay, it all makes sense now. That is very tricky to do, even for an experienced author. It is surprisingly difficult to make an ending that feels surprising, a good, fresh twist that kind of slaps the reader, but also it feels inevitable. Like, okay, that makes sense. And that's a very satisfying ending. Pacing guide, 90,000 word novel, right? So 90,000 words for a first time author, that's pretty good size, right? You don't want to go much longer than that, or you can go shorter, let's say 70,000. 90,000 words is a good range to shoot for. Now, if it's going to be epic fantasy or sci-fi, it's usually going to be longer, maybe 120, 130,000 words. But if you're a first-time author, it's much easier for a publisher to take a chance on you if the word count is lower, because everything across the board is much less expensive. So hiring an editor to edit less words, less expensive. Hiring a audiobook narrator to narrate those words is less expensive. And so for a publisher publishing a 100,000 word novel or let's say a 70,000 word novel, it's much easier if they're on equal par as far as quality of text and things like that. If they were able to get done in 70,000 words, the story, It's a much less venture for them, much less expensive. Hopefully that made sense. All right, and this is kind of where you want the acts, uh, as far as their word counts, to end up. So this isn't a law, this is a compass. Use it if you feel lost, right? If you're starting to get drowned either in the beginning, middle, end, the 3 acts is kind of a guideline to help you corral and where you should be. So by the time you get about 60, 70,000 words in, you should start thinking, okay, how am I going to tie this story up, right? If you don't start thinking that way, in my first novel, actually, I just started writing like crazy, ended up being huge. It was over 400,000 words. And I wish somebody would have pointed this out to me and said, hey, listen, you're 60,000 words in. You need to start thinking how you're going to wrap this up. By the end of the novel, it was so circuitous and so just organic and so massive. It was a behemoth. I couldn't do much with it, but there were some really cool elements and a lot that I learned from it. All right, story beats. A beat is a specific plot point or a specific plot event with a structural purpose. Think of them as landmarks on your map. You don't have to hit every road in between, but you know where you're going. Most popular system for novelists is Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. Now, this is the 15 plot beats he talks about, and you can get the book. You can get a lot more in depth with it. We're only going to focus on 5. I will mention all 15 though. All right, opening image. First impression sets tone, world, and character. Theme stated, what your story is really about within the first 10%. Now, this is a great concept that I wholeheartedly believe in, that Brandon Sanderson talks about quite a bit, called the reader's promise, right? If you start a book where it feels, let's say, very akin to Harry Potter, they're using magic in the beginning, and by the end, it becomes an action thriller book, you have broken that reader's promise. Even if they do like action thriller, it's not what you had promised them in the beginning of the book, right? So if you go to a Chinese restaurant, you're expecting to get Chinese food. You go to a burger joint, you're expected to order a burger and eat a burger. If you go to a burger joint and they have nothing but salads, right? It is going to be a mismatch on their reader expectation. So theme stated, I can't overstate how important that is to get that right and make it consistent throughout your book. Inciting incident, and we already talked about that. What is the world changes? This is when the hero's journey truly begins. It could be a number of things: a rejection, a cataclysmic event. It can be, most of my books, I like to, this inciting incident is going to be earth shattering, earth ending, but it doesn't have to be as dramatic. Midpoint, stakes rise, protagonist shifts from reactive to active. This is where inside you start cheering for that protagonist, right? You saw all the struggle they went through in the beginning, and now they're going to take the fight to the enemy, right? And that's when individuals really start connecting with that protagonist and start cheering him or her along. All is lost. Everything falls apart. Defeat seems total, right? The more powerful this is, the more rewarding the resolution becomes, right? If the world is about to end and they save the world, it is pretty dramatic. Now, just because it doesn't have to be, and I don't want everyone to come away thinking, oh, I've got to write some sort of cataclysm in there. That is simply not true. Just think about personal interaction and how powerful rejection is, or supporting someone in our own lives. So we know those powerful stories that don't have a plot that is so dramatic, but they are significant and they mean a lot, right? So everything falls apart is a metaphor. It doesn't necessarily have to literally fall apart. All right, here's the other 15 beats. I won't go through them all, but you can pause it and then you can check them out. Check out the book as well, and then you can do a deeper dive into it. I highly suggest that if you want to start writing a book and taking it seriously. All right. So here's just a wrap up. Protagonist acts from a place of genuine change, resolves the central conflict. Closing image echoes the opening, but everything is different, right? There should be a loop from the beginning to the end, some sort of connection. In the first Nickel Brickleby, he feels very self-conscious as he's looking in the mirror. By the time he goes to the end, he sees a mirror and is very intentionally, he doesn't look away for the first time in his life because he's not, maybe not the most confident person, but he's certainly confident enough to look at himself in the mirror. And that's what makes a really powerful ending, when you have a touchstone moment in the beginning and then it wraps up in the end. Plotter versus pantser, right? So the plotter are individuals that plot all the plot points, they outline it, they spend thousands of words doing it. I just did this for the third book of Acadia series, Charn, and I am obsessively a plotter. I plot everything. The reason being is this is how you're going to get those most powerful payoff moments. Now, a lot of people are pantsers. That kind of terrifies me. It's also how I first started writing. I just sat down and I just started writing. These are individuals that do that. They have some general idea of where they're going, but they just start writing. They make great characters and they end up a lot of times making a great story after substantive editing. So some famous pantsters is King, Martin, so Stephen King, the Game of Thrones author. Those individuals sat down and they just put words on a page and they came up with some of the most awesome literature out there. But their editor probably doesn't like them so much because there's so much they have to edit and change, and it's so much harder to get that beginning and end touchstone moments, right, that are powerful at the beginning and that mirror each other. All right, the planster. Now this is what I recommend for most everyone. This is essentially where you plan things out, but then you're not so rigid that you stick to it like it is the gospel, it is doctrine. Adding organic elements in writing is powerful. Honestly, when you have great characters, you put them in a great setting, right? They are going to do moments that actually surprise you as an author, where you have these individuals and you're staying true to their character in your plot or your points when you planned it out. They did something different, but you realize as you're writing, they wouldn't do that. And that actually makes fantastic fiction because you are maintaining the truth of that character. It becomes so much more real. All right, so they just have enough structure to anchor points, beginning, midpoint, ending, and the middle is open. Like a roadmap, they know where to start, destination, and they see 1 to 2 must stops open to detours, right? And there's a huge spectrum between just organic writing and completely planning every conversation element, right? Sometimes it's more necessary for different books for me. For the Acadia series that has a lot of political elements and plot points, ones that I really want to have strong beats, I tend to plan a lot more. For the Nickel Brickleby series, I tend to plan a little bit less. The best method, of course, is the one that keeps you writing. Whether you're a pantser, whether you're a plotter, the one that keeps you writing is going to work the best for you. All right, so which method is right for you? Try more structure if you've abandoned novels in the murky middle. It just got too confusing. You abandoned it because you just didn't know where it was going to go. Or try more freedom if you outline, then lose interest before you ever draft, right? You're not even interested in writing the story that you plotted. That you might just be more drawn to organic writing style because it's engaging to you. The goal is a finished draft. Everything else is in service of that. So you really have to pick the style that best suits you. All right, your assignment, the 5-sentence story. Who is your protagonist and what do they want? What is the inciting incident? What has changed at the midpoint? What is the all lost? What is the all is lost moment? How does the story end? You start with these 5 things and your story is going to start picking up traction. Result, you have a skeleton of a 3-act structure. So if you start that, first thing you do is go through these 5 things. You'll start flushing out that skeleton. All right, so here's the key takeaways. Next episode, we are going to get into world building. I absolutely love building worlds. So check it out.